This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, it's a big kavod to be here this evening to say Divrei Torah, Lilei Nishmas, Chana Pesa, Bas Reb Semach. Actually, I've been close with the Glenn family for a number of years. I know Bracha was a regular at my Shiurim for many years, and this is not the first time I've spoken for their mishpacha. And what makes it an even bigger kavod for me is this is the first time I've actually been in the Tag High School building, and my wife's uncle, Rabbi Whiteman, was the founder of this yeshiva, and I'm very pleased to acknowledge the presence of Tanta Toby. So it's a double kavod to be here this evening, and we hope the Divrei Torah tonight should be in Ilui Neshama, Techana Pesa, Bas Semach, and Meretz Hashem, she should be in Melitza Yeshara for her home mishpacha, for Simcha Sanachas, Abi Askoyel Tzedek. Do I need this? No, I don't. Okay. So I'm going to do something a little bit differently. I'm not going to give a speech. I'm not going to tell you stories. We're going to do something a little bit more substantial than that. I would like to give somewhat of a shiur. I gave you the source materials, Amar Makoimos, and hopefully bring out something very fundamental, something very inspirational that we could all take with us, not only on this week's Parsha, not only for the rest of the year, Meretz Hashem, a very important idea that we should really hang on to and hold on to for the rest of our lives. There's a Gemara Masechta Sukkah. You have all the sources on the sheets in front of you. The Gemara tells us, Hahi Sabasa, there was an old lady, the Asala Kamed Rav Nachman, who came before Rav Nachman, and she came with a taina, she came with a complaint. Amra Lech, she said the following. She said, Reish Galusa, the exilarch was a political, rabbinic position in Bavel. The Reish Galusa, Vekulu Rabbanon de Be Reish Galusa, Besukkah Gezula Havayasvi. She claimed that the sukkah that all the rabbis were sitting in was stolen. And it was stolen from none other than her. She claimed she was the rightful owner of the beams, of the planks, of the wooden poles of this sukkah. She said, they're sitting in my sukkah. Tzavcha, she cried, she screamed, she kvetched. V'loi ashkach ba Rav Nachman did not pay attention to her. Rav Nachman seemed to ignore her. This poor lady, she's saying, I want my beam back. He said, what do you want the beam for? He said, none of your business what I want the beam. It's my sukkah. My kid's not behaving. Maybe I need the beam. So finally, Rav Nachman did not pay attention to her. Amruleh, she said, do you know who I am? Do you know who you're dealing with? Itza dahavale la'avua. I'm a woman that my father had. Tlas mea v'tamne srei avdi. My father had 318 slaves. You know what you're dealing with? You can't mess with me. My daddy had 318 slaves. I'm the one screaming to you. I'm not an ordinary person. My father had 318 slaves. He didn't pay attention to her. And Rav Nachman said she's just a kvetch. Halachically, she's not entitled to the beams, because the halacha is that if you steal something, then the person who stole it does not have to return that actual item. They can actually just pay instead of the item that they stole. That is a takana that the Gemara mentions in Masechta Gittin. But here we have a very odd story, a very strange story. The woman is coming to Rav Nachman, the woman's coming to the Gadol Hadar, and the woman's saying to the Gadol Hadar, how dare you start up with me? Do you know who I am? I'm a woman, my father had 318 slaves. I mean, who could care less how many slaves her father had? And who's her father anyway? I mean, why didn't you say, you know how much money my father has in his bank account? You know how much money he has in escrow? What's her point? What kind of nonsense is this woman spewing that her father had 318 slaves? Who's her father? It's a mystery. You know, many years ago, when one of the wars in Eretz Yisrael, and there was a lot of messianic fervor, something like maybe what we'll see on Tuesday, whoever wins, right? Whenever something cataclysmic happens, there's a lot of fervor, messianic fervor, and people were saying, Mashiach is coming, Mashiach is coming. And Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky got up in the Beis Medrash and gave a clap on the bima. He said, one thing I know for sure, Mashiach is not coming. So he said, Rebbe, look, maybe you're not a proponent of the state of Medinat Yisrael. Maybe that's not your shita. You're not a Tzioni, but how do you know 1,000% Mashiach? You never know. Mashiach could come at any second. He says, well, there's certain times that we know Mashiach is not coming. So he said, when is that? The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Ein ben David ba, you have it on your sheet number 2, David HaMelech will not come ad she yisyashu min hageulah, until people give up hope that Mashiach is coming. So whenever there's a lot of fervor, whenever there's a lot of messianic talk, then we know for sure Mashiach is not coming. In other words, he's not coming when anybody thinks he's coming. When people think he's coming, then we know one thing's for sure, he ain't coming. Why is that so? Why is that true? Why will Mashiach not come when people think he is coming? Why will Mashiach only come when, so to speak, we've given up hope from him coming? In this week's Parsha, we encounter a very important incident. So we have the war of the 4 kings and the 5 kings, and the 4 kings defeat the 5 kings, and they capture who? Lot. Very good. They capture Lot, and they take him, they keep him hostage, and Avram Avinu finds out about it, and Avram Avinu decides to go on the impossible mission. He's going to rescue his nephew from the 4 kings. These are the mightiest warriors in the world. They defeated the 5 kings. And the pasuk says, Vayishma Avram heard ki nishba achiv, that his brother was captured, meaning his nephew. Vayorek es chanichav, he arms his trained soldiers. Yelidei beisai, those who were trained in his house. So in other words, Avram Avinu gets together the ma and pa little army of Abraham. How many people? Shmoina asar ushloish meos, 318 soldiers. Vayirdoy fa'adon, and he pursues the 4 kings until done. So how many people in Avram Avinu's army? 318. Shmoina asar ushloish meos. Comes Rashi, and Rashi says, no, just kidding. Not 318. Says Rashi, Rabbi Seinu Amru, Eliezer Levadoi Haya. It wasn't 318, it wasn't 31.8, it wasn't 3.18. It was one person. Who was Avram Avinu's army? Avram Avinu's army consisted of one guy. His name was Eliezer. Yeah, but that's not what the pasuk says. So Rashi says the Gematria of Eliezer is 318. Aleph is 1, Lamed is 30, Yud is 10, Ayin is 70, Zayin is 7, Resh is 200. You add it all up together, 318. So even though the pasuk says 318, it doesn't really mean that. It's just a Gematria. And the question is, you don't talk that way. I mean, that's like a very strange way of talking. Imagine if we put a sign that Glatstein's coming to speak on tomorrow, and I don't show up. So Shani calls, where were you? Tomorrow. Gematria of tomorrow is in 83 years from now. Gematria. That's, the world doesn't work that way. You go to the store, I'm going to pay kesef. No, so you take the item, where's the kesef? Kesef. Kesef's Gematria, 180. I'll give you 180 toothpicks. There's a rule, ein mikra yotzei midei pshutai. You cannot darshan a pasuk. That means whatever drush you want to say, you have to take the literal meaning of the pasuk. You always have to remember Rashi in Bereshis, Paragimel, pasuk ches, va'ani lepshutai shel mikra basi. My job is to tell you the simple explanation in the pasuk. How do Chazal know? How does Rashi know that the pasuk says 318? So maybe it means 318. Is there a kasha if it's 318? Maybe the pasuk is literal. Is there any reason to assume the pasuk is not literal? How does Rashi know that 318 is Eliezer? So it's very interesting. The Rishonim here, Rabbeinu Bechaye and the Das Akenim Bali HaTosfos, they both learn the incident in the following way. They both interpret it the following way. They say like this: Avada! He had 318 men. That's what the pasuk says. But there's a rule, and it says in Parshas Kiseitze, that when you go to war, so the Kohen Gadol makes an announcement. He says not everybody is allowed to fight in the battle. If anybody just got engaged and didn't consummate the marriage, go home. If anyone just bought a house and didn't live in it, go home. If anyone just bought a vineyard and didn't live in it, go home. If anybody is afraid, if anyone's a scaredy cat, get lost, go home. We don't need you in the war. So it's interesting. The Yerushalmi says, what does it mean if somebody's scared? Why would somebody be scared? So the Yerushalmi says somebody who's scared that they might have an Avera in their repertoire, and because of that, they're afraid they don't have the requisite zechusim to protect them in a time of danger. And the Yerushalmi says, what kind of Avera would disqualify somebody from being protected in a time of danger? And the Yerushalmi says, if somebody speaks by davening in between Yishtabach and Yoitzer, that's such a severe Avera that would disqualify you. In other words, very likely you would not survive the war if a person has that Avera in their repertoire. So the question is, wait a second. That happens to be the one time in davening that you're allowed to talk for a Dvar Mitzvah. Interesting, people don't know. Let's say from Bar Shamar to Yishtabach, you're not allowed to talk. From Yoitzer Ar until Shemona Esrei, you're not allowed to talk. During Shemona Esrei, you're not allowed to talk. In between Yoitzer Ar and the end of Yishtabach, for a Dvar Mitzvah, you're allowed to talk. So for instance, so now I'm rabbi in Cedarhurst. In my old shul in Kew Garden Hills, it was a big pulpit synagogue, like the oldest shul in Queens, and we had a very hard time getting a minyan together. So it would always be like the end of Yishtabach, and we didn't have a minyan. So how do you get a 10th person? So if you know the halacha, that you could actually make a phone call between the end of Yishtabach and the beginning of Yod. So it's better if nobody sees you do this, but halacha l'maisa, you're allowed to talk for a Dvar Mitzvah. No other time in davening you're allowed to talk for a Dvar Mitzvah. So it happens to be the most lenient time to talk by davening is between the end of Yishtabach and the beginning of Yotzar Ar. But what if it's not for a Dvar Mitzvah? It's so severe that if you have that on your record, you can't fight in the war. So says Rabbeinu Bechaye, says Tosfos, basically Avram Avinu started out with an army of 318. But then he made a few announcements. Anyone get married? 5 people packed out. Anyone buy a house? 7 people packed out. Anybody buy a vineyard? 3 people packed out. Anyone talk by davening? Everybody left. Unfortunately. Except for Eliezer. Eliezer was the only one left. So the pshat is like this. Pshat in the pasuk is that he started out with 318 men literally, actually. But then after everybody left, he was left with Eliezer, but it doesn't say Eliezer. No, Eliezer's Gematria 318. So the pshat and the drush both fit very, very conveniently into the words of the pasuk. But the bottom line is, it's that boring. Okay. The bottom line is,
Just had a question.
oh, sorry, yeah.
They didn't have davening then.
They did.
Anshe Knesset Hagdolah davening.
So Anshe Knesset Hagdolah made...
When they were capturing the war.
Okay, so that's a good question. Anshe Knesset Hagdolah made the precise text that we have today. In other words, Yishtabach, Shimcha, Lo'ad, Malkinu, Akel, but like Avram Avinu was Masakin Shachris. So part of Shachris was Berchas Kriya Shema. So they didn't have the same words of Berchas Kriya Shema that we have today, but they had 3 brachas Kriya Shema in the morning and 4 at night. And everybody would say it according to their particular nusach and text. So there was still a concept of Yishtabach and Yotzar Ar. The Ben Ish Chai writes about this. But yes, there very possibly was a concept of bracha. It's not the same text that we have today. The bottom line is, why does the Torah say so mysteriously, and why doesn't the Torah just write straight out that Avraham Avinu took Eliezer with him to war against the 4 kings? Why does it say it in this roundabout way? He took 318 men, and we're going to figure out the Gematria of 318 is Eliezer. Interestingly, if you take a look in the Pesukim in number 7, the Pasuk says, Vayicholek Aleihem Laila. And Avraham divided for them night. What does that mean? What it should be saying is that he split his troops. You guys, you go to the east. You guys, you go to the west. But then it should have said, Vayicholek Aleihem Bilayla. He split them up during the night. What does it mean, Vayicholek Aleihem Laila? He split the night. How do you split the night? So the Rashi brings down, yes, the Rebbeinu Shalom actually split that night into half. What happened? The first half of that night was the miracle of Avraham Avinu defeating the 4 kings. The second half of the night was preserved, was nishmar for Chatzois Laila of Leil Yitzias Mitzrayim. Wow, Hafla V'Fela, a wondrous thing. That means the miracle of Yitzias Mitzrayim was the second half of a coin. The first half of the coin was the miracle of Avraham Avinu defeating the 4 kings. The second half of the coin was the miracle of Yitzias Mitzrayim. That's what the pasuk says. Vayecholek aleihem laila. God divided the night. That night was divided in half. Half of it was reserved for the miracle against the 4 kings. The other half was reserved for the miracle of Yitzias Mitzrayim. And the question is, where do we ever see anything remotely similar to this idea? Why does Hashem have to make half the miracle against the 4 kings and the other half of the miracle the night of Yitzias Mitzrayim? Usually Hashem just does miracle, miracle, miracle. We don't find Hashem takes 2 half miracles and puts them together. Let's say Daniel, when he was in the lion's den. Do we find, Rebbeinu Hashem says, I have half of the miracle of Makas Arov left over, I'll use the other half to save Daniel from the lion's den. No! The Rebbeinu Hashem has plenty of nisim to go around. He has 1 nays for Makas Arov and 1 nays for saving Daniel from the lion's den. Nowhere in the whole Tanakh do we find, half of the miracle here and we'll save the other half for a very similar situation. What exactly is the reason that the Rebbeinu Hashem, so to speak, cut the night in half, used half the night for the miracle of saving life, and the other half for the miracle of taking Klal Yisrael out of Mitzrayim? Pasuk says in Parsha Shoftim, Kiseitze la malchama alayvecha. When you go out to war against your enemy. V'ro'isa sus v'rechav, you're going to see a horse, you're going to see a chariot. Am rav mimcha, a people greater than you. Lo yisira mayhem, don't be afraid of them. Ki Hashem Eloikecha imach, the Rebbeinu Shalom is with you. Hamalcha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of Mitzrayim. Says the Arachaim HaKadosh, what this pasuk is telling us is that there's a challenge in life that every human being and every yid faces almost on a daily basis. And that is, there are situations that we find ourselves in, be it physical situations, health situations, emotional distress, spiritual predicaments, where a person says, you know what, this matzav, whatever it may be, is so difficult, is so overwhelming, is such a great hurdle, it's not possible. It's just not possible ever to extricate myself. I'll never regain my health. I'll never cross that emotional hurdle. I'll never reach that level in ruchnius. I'm so steeped in a bad habit, in a bad way, in a bad rut, that I'll just never climb out. And sometimes there are matzavim in life that seem so bleak and so dark and so impossible that a person just throws in the towel. And consciously or subconsciously, a person says, you know what? In this area in life, it's just not happening for me. And it never will happen for me. I'll just never get out of it. This is the main tactic of the Yetzer Hara. The main tactic of the Yetzer Hara is to get a person to feel despair. For a person to feel that it's so dark and it's so bleak and it's so impossible and it's just not happening, and then the result is throw in the towel. Give up hope. In Lashon HaKodesh, it's called Yush. The main tactic of the Yetzer Hara is Yush. Because once a person feels hopeless, they're completely sapped of any energy, of any emotion, of any feeling, the most crippling human emotion, that which hampers us more than anything else, are feelings of Yush. Because when a person feels, you know what, in that matzav, it will never happen for me, that is the greatest tactic of the Yetzer Hara. Yush! There is a great Talmud Chacham, he used to live in Monsey, who's also a psychologist, Rabbi Yaakov Greenwald, who is a Talmud of the Stipler and also the Manchester Rosh Hashiva. He wrote 2 Svarim, incredible Svarim. that talk about the psychology of a human being al pi hashkafas haTorah. He was very close with the Stipler going, and he wrote Svarim, really Svarim that we never had anything remotely similar to these Svarim in our whole history. He talks about how in our times the atzavim, the nerves, are so delicate and so weak compared to earlier generations. There's so many types of worries that people have bizman hazeh. So many types of anxieties. There's so many types of fears that are so crippling that these are things that we never had to deal with. Human beings used to be of much greater fortitude, much stronger emotional fortitude. And of all the anxieties and all the feelings that could cripple a person, I want to show you these words. Look at number 11. He says, Mikol rigshay ha'adam, from all human emotion, lo nimtza regesh sheyesh bekoichai lichbosh. There is no feeling that could squelch, that could lahastir, to conceal, the limnoya, and to prevent, the af ledake, and to crush, koichos hanefesh, the talents and the abilities of the personality, that if what restrains a person from activating their potential more than anything else, kimoi hayush, like depression, like hopelessness. Hopelessness is the feeling that destroys a person, that crushes a person more than any other human emotion. And therefore, you should know, the Yetzer Hara, more than trying to get a person to do an Avera, you forget the Avera. Even more than that, the Yetzer Hara wants to destroy a person physically and emotionally, wants to make a person sad, wants to make a person feel hopeless and desperate, and wants a person to have a bleak outlook in life. There is no more debilitating feeling in the human persona than Yush. I want to share with you a Gemara on Brachos Daf Yud Amud Aleph. The Gemara tells us about Chizkiyahu HaMelech. So one day Chizkiyahu HaMelech, who by the way was the single greatest Marbitz Torah in the history of Klal Yisrael. There is nobody who spread Torah to the Jewish people like Chizkiyahu HaMelech. The Gemara says that they checked Midon va'ard Beersheva, from the north of Israel to the south of Israel. They did not find one child who was not proficient in all the minute laws of Tumah v'Tahara. And that was all due to the influence of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Chizkiyahu HaMelech would go to every single Beis Medrash. He would put a sword at the entrance of the Beis Medrash. He would say, anyone who doesn't learn Torah, I will kill with the sword. He was the greatest Marbitz Torah in the history of Klal Yisrael. And one day he gets a knock on the door. And he said, who's there? It's Yeshaya Hanavi, it's good old prophet Isaiah. Yeshaya Hanavi. And Yeshaya says, I don't have good news for you, pal. Here's the predicament. You're going to die and you lost your share in the world to come. So what did I do wrong? I'm the greatest Marbitz Torah in history. He said, you're not interested in getting married. He said, well, no, not interested in getting married. I see, Baruch HaKodesh, that I'm going to have children who are Rishon. And that's why I'm not interested. So Yeshaya tells him the famous maxim, what business do you have meddling in the affairs of heaven? Bahadei kavshid Rachman olam malach. Well, what's it your business? What the outcome will be? You do what you have to do, and God will take care of the rest. Chizkiyahu HaMelech says, big talker, I'll marry your daughter. Maybe the zechus of me and the zechus of you will have good children. So Chizkiyahu HaMelech marries the daughter of Yeshaya. And Yeshaya said, but, it's very nice. I'll come to the wedding. I'll give you chasen cufflings, whatever you want. But one thing, you're still going to die and you still lost your share in the world to come. Whereupon Chizkiyahu HaMelech tells Yeshaya ben Amoitz, go fly a kite, go jump in the lake, I don't care what you say. You want to speak nevuah? No problem, I'll listen to you. But you're telling me that I lost my share in the world to come. He says, Kach mikublani mi beis dinoi shel avi abba. I have a tradition from my father's father. Afilu charav chada munachas al tzavoroi shel adam. Even when there's a sharp knife on a person's neck, al yimna atzmoi min harachamim. Never give up hope from mercy. So you're telling me I'm going to lose my share in the world to come. You're telling me I'm going to die. I don't care what you say. You're a liar. You don't know what you're talking about. I don't care that you're a navi. Afilu cherev chada munachas al tzavoroi shel adam. Even when the knife is on the neck, never give up hope. A Jew never gives up hope. In the lexicon of a Jew, the word yiush does not exist. There is no concept of yiush in Judaism. I want to share with you possibly the most well-known piece in all the writings of Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen. Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin lived from 1823 to 1900. One of the most brilliant Gedolim of all time. Really a brilliant thinker. One of the all-time minds. And he writes in the Sefer Pri Tzadik, eternal words. Words that reverberate for all time. He writes, look at number 15, Ein liyehudi lehisyayesh mishum davar. A Jew should never give up hope from anything. He says whether it's health, whether it's physical, the Gemara just told us, afilu cherev chada munachas al tzavorei shel adam al yimna atzmei min harachamim. He says even in ruchnius, sometimes a person gets so caught up in an avera or in a bad habit, they feel, I'll never overcome that challenge. I'll never stop doing that avera. I'm so tied, I'm so entangled in that sin, I'm so connected to that sin, I'll never get out of it. He said, it doesn't matter what the case is. Ein liyehudi lehisyayesh mikol davar sheba'olam. And then he says an amazing thing. He says, if you think of the beginnings of Klal Yisrael, that's this week's Parsha, the Haskalah, the Shiur of Klal Yisrael. You have Avraham Avinu and Sarah Imenu. So you would expect, look, what a beautiful shidduch. Avraham, Sarah, you would expect, they get married, and they have this nice, wonderful family right away, 10 children, and the rest is history, and Klal Yisrael is formed. And Avraham Avinu, he's 30, he's 40, and Sarah Imenu, she's 20, she's 30, she's 40, she's 50, she's 60, and they have no children. Nebuch. So you say, okay, it's going to take time. Well, you have to know, it's not the pshat that it was improbable for Abraham and Sarah to have children. It's not that they were somewhat infertile. The Gemara says Avraham Avinu was an akar, which means not statistically unlikely. Avraham Avinu was not able to father a child. It was statistically impossible. Sarah Imenu, the Gemara says, wasn't just an akara. She was an islandess, the Gemara Yevamot says. Islandess means she didn't even have the kalim. And yet, we're here today. Why would the Rebbe Shalom create Klal Yisrael that way? Why would the Rebbe Shalom just minimize the miracle? I mean, Rebbe Shalom doesn't make miracles for nothing. He makes miracles if he has to, if he has no alternative, if there's no choice. Rebbe Shalom never likes to make miracles. It goes against the grain of the way he created the world. Why would the Rebbe Shalom create Klal Yisrael in such an unusual way? With Abraham and Sarah. Not improbable, not unlikely, impossible. Why would the Rebbe Shalom create Klal Yisrael based on impossibility? Says Rav Tzadok HaKohen, because Rebbe Shalom was demonstrating that Klal Yisrael is built on the fabric that there is no concept of Yush. There is no concept of impossible. The bedrock of Klal Yisrael, the foundation of Klal Yisrael, the Shiur of Klal Yisrael is that Rebbe Shalom built us that there is no concept of Yush. There is no concept of hopelessness. That's why, if you look in the Nevi'im that we lay in the Shiva de Nechemta, on the 7 weeks of consolation, and we're mourning the Beis HaMikdash, what does the Navi Yeshaya tell us? Habitu el Avraham avichem v'el Sarah sechay la'alchem. Look at Avraham and Sarah. Why is the Navi telling us to look at Avraham and Sarah? Because when we look at the predicament of Klal Yisrael, how bleak it looks, how long our galus has been, and we say to ourselves, how in the world will Rebbe Shalom ever get us out of this mess? So Rebbe Shalom says, look where I created you from. I made you from Abraham and Sarah. I made you from not the unlikely, not from the improbable. I made you from the impossible. That means the definition of Klal Yisrael is we rise above Yush. Yush is not in our vocabulary. You know when Mashiach will come? Mashiach will only come when nobody ever thinks he could ever come. When we're Messiahish min Hagula, because Rebbe Shem wants to show us that is the definition of my relationship with you. I rise above the impossible. I rise above when all hope seems lost. So Avram Avinu embarks on the impossible mission. His nephew Lloyd is kidnapped by the most powerful empire in the world, the 4 kings. These 4 kings just beat the 5 kings. This is the impossible situation. For one man with his, ma and pa backyard army, he's going to go rescue Lloyd. What would a regular person do? What would the typical person do? Yush. Hopeless. Throw in the towel. It's just not happening. I'll never see Lloyd again. What's the Gematria of Yush? Yud, Aleph, Vav, Shin. Yud is 10, Aleph is 1, Vav is 6, Shin is 300. 317. Yush is 317. Avraham Avinu says, I'm a Jew, I'm Avraham Ha'ivri. Yush is not part of my vocabulary. Yush is not part of my lexicon. I don't believe in Yush. I rise above Yush. So how many people did Abraham take with him? 318. Why 318? Avraham Avinu was demonstrating he rises above Yush. He transcends Yush. Yush is in the background. Forget Yush. We rise above. We're from Bnei Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. The creation of Klal Yisrael is Limala Yush. 318. So the question is, how do you rise above Yush? Eliezer. What does Eliezer mean? Who's the first person in Tanakh who's called Eliezer where the Torah explains the meaning of the word? Eliezer, the son of Moshe Rabbeinu. Vayikra v'shem ha'echad Eliezer. Look at number 14. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu call his son Eliezer? Ki Eloikei avi bi'ezri vayatzileni mecherev paroi. Moshe Rabbeinu was in Mitzrayim, and Paroi caught Moshe Rabbeinu, and he tied him up, and he took the hatchet, and he swung it at his neck. Is there ever a moment in life that seems more bleak, that seems more desperate, that seems more impossible, that when that hatchet is being flung against the neck, that's the moment of Yush? But Moshe Rabbeinu survived. How did Moshe Rabbeinu survive? Because even though in life there are situations that seem so dark and so desperate and so bleak and so nisyayesh, but when you realize Ki Eloikei avi be'ezri, when you realize Eliezer, there's someone standing right by you on your right side, able and willing and yearning to help you, then there is no desperation and there's no darkness, because you realize Rebbe Shem could save you and rescue you from any situation. Yush is 317. But Avram Avinu rises above Yush. Why does the Torah tell us he took 318? What's the magic? What's the mystery of 318? The answer is, in Judaism, the number 317 is a bad number. It's a dirty number. That's the number of Yush. We don't believe in 317. We don't believe in Yush. So Avram Avinu takes with him 318 men, meaning he takes with him the koyach of transcending Yush. Who does he take with him? Eliezer. Ki Eloikei avi be'ezri vayatzileni mecherev paroi. In life, how often do we feel? Shir la'malois. Esa einai el hahorim me'ayin yavo yezri. How often do we lift up our hands and we say, Me'ayin yavo yezri? Where's our help going to come from? Me'ayin. What does me'ayin mean? From where? From nothing. How often in life does it seem like it's just impossible? Me'ayin. What's the answer to that question of me'ayin yavo yezri? Ezri me'im Hashem. Oisei. Shamayim v'aretz. Our help comes from Rebbeinu Shalom, who created heaven and earth. Now, when Hashem made heaven and earth, what did He make heaven and earth out of? What did He create it from? He made it me'ayin, yesh me'ayin, from nothing. He didn't take building blocks and make the world. The Bereshis bara Elokim, in Latin we say creation ex nihilo, yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. The Rebbeinu Shalom created the world out of nothing, out of the thin air. So when you throw up your hands and you say Shalom Alois, where is my help coming from? It seems me'ayin. The answer is, it is me'ayin. It's me'ayin. It's from Ezri me'im Hashem, oisei shamayim v'haaretz. The koyach of a yid is to realize that 317 is for the Ummah Yisraelim. Avram Avinu, imbued, instilled in Klal Yisrael, by Yecholek Aleihem Laila, the pasuk says. What did he take with him? Shmoina Asar Ushloish Meos, the koyach to transcend Yush, the koyach of Eliezer, the koyach of Elekei Avi Be'ezri. Remember a couple of years ago, so we went to visit my grandfather. My grandfather is a Holocaust survivor. He's a Rav in Pittsburgh, Kneinahara. He's a Ben Mea Shana. And so I went with my brother in Eretz Yisrael, and we took the children, the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and he was just so overwhelmed with emotion. And he had a flashback to when he was in Auschwitz. And he was a young man in Auschwitz. And the first thing the Germans did was they gathered up all of the old people and they exterminated them. And my grandfather, it still rings in his ears how these old men and old women were crying. They were crying, who's going to say Kaddish for us? Who's going to say Kaddish for us? My grandfather remembers thinking, who's going to say Kaddish for you? You have a family. He wasn't even married at the time. Who's going to say Kaddish for me? And now, 75 years later, he sees children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Who could have ever imagined something like that? He was in Auschwitz, he was at the doorstep of the crematoria. They had told him left. Him and his brother, they had told him to go to the left. And they were at the threshold, they were at the doorstep of the crematoria. And my grandfather's brother, Uncle Henoch, he turns to my grandfather, he says, my entire breeder, please, I'm going to die even before I get into the crematoria. My throat is so parched. Please give me a little bit of water. My grandfather said, no. You're just going to prolong your agony. You can't drink now. It's just going to be a more torturous death. And they had literally both put one foot into the crematorium, and at the last second, SS officer grabbed both of them by the hair, yanked them out. They said, you're young, you could work. And they were saved at the last moment. Yush is not part of the lexicon of a Jew. We don't have the concept of Yush. The concept of giving up hope is for the Ummah Yisraelim. Avraham Avinu, Bnei Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is Shmoina Asar Shloish Meos, 318. We rise above Yush. There is no concept of Yush. After the war, so my grandfather was interviewed by the media. So they said, Rabbi, you saw the butchery of your brothers and sisters. You saw the massacre of your people. Did you at any point lose hope? Did you at any point lose faith in God, lose faith in the promises of the Torah? So my grandfather says, I have to be honest with you. Did I lose faith? Of course I lost faith. I lost faith in man. I lost faith in mankind. How could human beings become barbarians, become butchers? How could civilized society like Germany shed their conscience? How could the United States of America turn the other way as if they didn't know? How could the United Kingdom not save us? So did I lose faith? Sure, I lost faith. I lost faith in Basar V'Dam, but never for a moment did I lose faith in the Ribono Shel Olam. Yush is not part of our vocabulary. Vayecholek aleihem laila shmoina asar ushloish meos, 318. When Chizkiyahu was given that predicament by Yeshaya Hanavi, Chizkiyahu says, I don't care what you say, Yeshaya. You want to tell me nevuah? Tell me nevuah. But you're telling me that I'm hopeless? Kach mi kublani mi beis avi abba. I have a tradition from my grandfather. Afilu cherav chada munachas al tzavaroi shel adam. Even when there's a knife at the neck, al yimna atzmai min arachmim, never give up hope. What was Chizkiyahu HaMelech saying? That I have a tradition from my grandfather. Who was Chizkiyahu's grandfather? David HaMelech. Where do we ever find David HaMelech told Chizkiyahu, Afilu cherav chada munachas al tzavaroi shel adam al yimna atzmai min arachmim? Doesn't say that anywhere. How did Chizkiyahu HaNavi know that? Who experienced being saved from hopelessness? Light. Light was in the clutches of the four kings. Whose neshama was, so to speak, hidden in light? Mayav. Light's daughter produced Mayav. Who came from Mayav? Rus. Who came from Rus? David. Who was trapped there in Sodom when Lot was kidnapped and held hostage? David was there. And David learned a very valuable lesson. He learned that even when the situation seems so bleak and so hopeless and impossible, Avraham Avinu, a Yid, has the koyach to take 318. 318 is the koyach to rise above Yish and extract somebody from the darkest, bleakest matzav. Says Chizkiyahu HaMelech, I have a tradition, mi beis avi abba, from David HaMelech. David HaMelech, who was lost in Sodom, he inculcated this message of rising, transcending the desperation of Yish. Let's talk a little bit about Eliezer. It's an amazing thing. When Avraham Avinu tells Eliezer, look, I want you to find the shidduch for Yitzchak, so the pasuk says, Ulai lo soive ha'isha. Eliezer expressed the hesitation, maybe the girl that I find, she's not going to be interested. So Rashi points out, I want to show you on the Maramakarmis, take a look at number 18. Rashi points out, V'oimar el Adoni, Ulai lo selech ha'isha acharoi. Maybe the woman won't want to follow me. So Rashi writes, Elaiksiv, meaning me. In other words, what he was saying was, why do you need to find a wife for Yitzchak? What about my daughter? Why don't you turn to me? I have a wonderful daughter. She would make a great shidduch for Yitzchak. So Avram says, no, you know how shidduchim works. Look, you know our yichus, we're baruch. You're yichus, you're a bunch of arurim, you're cursed. It's not a shidduch. Ein arur mizdabek b'baruch. You're cursed, we're blessed. Shtimnish, this ain't gonna go. We can't make a shidduch. If you were given that phone call, sorry, we're not interested. You're just rotten, and we're better than you. So most people, they'd throw in the towel. They'd say, forget it. It's just not happening. It ain't happening. It's an amazing thing. Can you imagine? Eliezer has to walk around with the stigma. He's such an oror. Avraham Avinu is not interested in him. And yet, he was able to extract himself from that situation. Because when Eliezer comes back and presents Rivka to Avraham Avinu gives him a bracha. And Chazal say that at that moment, because he had served Avraham so faithfully, he actually extracted himself from being an Arur, and he became a Baruch. How do you do that? Let's say you have a guy, I really want to be a Kohen, so he could sit and shuckle over the Gemara, and he could memorize Shas. He's just not becoming a Kohen. It's impossible. If you're not born a Kohen, you can't become a Kohen. If you're not born a Levi, you can't become a Levi. So if you're born an Arur and you're born an Evan, how does that happen? Isn't it impossible? This is Eliezer. Eliezer's 3:18. Eliezer has the koyach that nothing's impossible. He could start off the dregs of society. He could start off somebody who Avraham Avinu wouldn't look at, and he ends off the game on such a high madrega. He becomes the madrega of Avraham Avinu. He becomes a baruch, to the point where the Arizal writes that he had a Gilgal. You know who the Gilgal of Eliezer was? Eliezer reincarnated as Kalev ben Yefuneh, the Gadol Hadar. Half-love a fella. Here you have somebody who's rejected, dejected. Avraham Avinu says, sorry, pal, you're an error. And he ends off the game, the leader of Klal Yisrael. Because that's the koyach that a Jew has. That's how Hashem built Klal Yisrael. Avraham and Sarah. He didn't build us on the improbable. He didn't build us on the unlikely. He built us over on the impossible. Impossible is not a word. Yush is not a word. We rise above Yush. Let me draw your attention to Hagar. Hagar sees that Yishmael, in this week's Parsha, at the end of the Parsha, he's dying of thirst. So what does she do? She takes him and she puts him Vayichlu hamayim min achemes vatashlich es hayeled for the prize of the night. Tachas achad. What's the last word? She put him tachas achad hasichim. She put him under one of the bushes. Sichem. What's siach? Shin Yud Ches 3:18. Hagar is not Bnei Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So when she sees the situation is desperate and hopeless, you know what she does? Forget it. Siach is 3:18. Tachas achasim. She goes below 3:18. What's below 3:18? 3:17. Yosh. She doesn't have that koyach. She doesn't have the koyach of Bnei Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov to rise, to transcend above Yush, to say, you know what? However difficult the matzav seems to be, whatever situation we find ourselves in life, if we recognize, if we feel, if we realize that even though Shir La'amalo says, but if we realize Ki Elokei Avi V'Yezri, we have the koyach of 3:18, we have the koyach of the Shem Hashem to help us rise above the impossible. So coming back to the Gemara that we began with, this woman comes to Rav Nachman. She says, Rav Nachman, the rabbis, they stole my sukkah, and they're sitting in my sukkah. Do you know who I am? My father had 318 slaves. So what's this woman smoking? Well, she's crazy. What's she saying? She had 318 slaves? Who cares how many slaves she had? What was she saying? She says, my father was Avram Avinu. He had 318 slaves, meaning he had the koyach to rise above Yush. Why do you think I don't deserve my sukkah back? You think I gave up hope from ever getting it back again? Because the halacha is, if someone steals something from you and you give up hope from it, then it's not yours anymore. You're never going to get it back. No! Do you know who I am? My father had 318 slaves. Who's her father? Avraham Avinu. She says, I'm a Yid. I'm a Jew. I come from Avraham and Sarah. I have the koyach that no matter how desperate the situation is, I'm not afraid of these Reish Galusa. I never gave up hope from getting that sukkah back because my father has Eliezer, has 318, has the koyach to rise above the impossible. And that's the limud of Parshas Lecha, and it's a limud that we really need to take with us for the rest of our life and every moment of life, to always feel that the Rebbeinu Shalom is standing by our side, and Meretz Hashem, Rebbeinu Shalom should give us all simchas, nachas, yeshuas, v'nachamos, abiyas, kol tzedek, m'her v'yameinu, amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.